Okay, thank you. I've just had a message saying recording and transcription has started automatically. Okay, so first of all, can I just check that everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So this hearing session is now open. It forms part of the examination of the Reading Borough Local Plan partial update. My name is Ms. Joanna Gilbert, and I'm the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct this examination and to report to the Council in due course. The purpose of the hearing today is to enable the people in the hearing to put forward their points of view and to help me to get the information I need. Before we start discussion, I'd just like to go through some formalities. So, Mr. Walton, you will have been in touch with the programme officer in the past. Her name is Jane Greenway, and she remains the first point of contact if any assistance is required, although she's not in the call today. Can I ask the council officer to introduce himself, please?
Yes, I'm Mark Warringham, Planning Policy Manager.
Thank you. And can I ask the representative to introduce himself and confirm who he represents?
Yes, I'm Jonathan Walton, Planning Director with a company called Opus Work, representing Maple Durham Properties.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walton. Okay, just in terms of housekeeping, can we make sure all mobile phones are turned off or switched to silent? And can I just check, just in terms of what other people can see? At the moment, I can just see 3 people in small boxes on the screen. Is it possible to change the settings so that we're all slightly larger on screen, please, Mr. Warringham?
I can attempt to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Missing Sarah today, who normally knows how to control it. So
fair enough.
It's usually on the view settings. Is usually how you find it, or more, but it depends on the system you're on.
maybe she continues to do the formalities on hold.
Okay.
I'll just try.
And we may
sort
all
this
suddenly appear in far larger sizes than we were before. Okay. So just to confirm, the plan under examination is the Reading Borough Local Plan Partial Update, the LPPU. Prior to its submission to the Secretary of State for examination, Regulation 19 consultation took place. And I'd just like to confirm that I have those representations before me and I will be taking them into account. I've previously produced a guidance note for the Stage 2 hearings, which is EX038, and I also identified matters, issues and related questions, which is EX037. I have hearing statements from the Council and from others as provided on the examination webpage. The Council has also published the LPPU list of changes to the submission draft, which is LP002, and that accompanied the submission of the LPPU. However, these changes haven't been subject to public consultation or sustainability appraisal, and I've already advised the Council that I am examining the plan as submitted. I'm tasked with considering the soundness of the LPPU in accordance with the criteria in the National Planning Policy Framework published on the 19th of December 2023 and whether it's legally compliant. But in submitting the LPPU, the Council considers that it is sound and therefore that is the starting point for the examination. So if you are challenging the soundness of the LPPU, then it is helpful if you can explain why and what changes would be necessary to make it sound. When speaking, we don't have a hands up function in this particular version of Teams. So obviously there's only 3 of us in the call. That should be perfectly manageable. But if you do wish to highlight certain parts of your statement or any other documents that form part of the examination, then please note that it's helpful to me if you can provide any reference number or page number and paragraph number. It is open to the Council to propose further changes to the plan. I have asked that they keep a record of possible changes or further actions that arise during the hearings, and they have been doing this. This running list of actions will be placed on the Council's website after the Stage 2 hearings have been completed, so after today's hearing. Any main modifications should be the subject of future consultation. I have also indicated to the Council during the hearings that I will write to them in due course regarding several issues that I'm reflecting on. And such a letter would, of course, be placed on the examination website. So just to note, the examination remains open until my report is submitted to the Council. No further representations or evidence will be accepted after the hearing sessions are finished unless I specifically request otherwise. And and I have looked to indicate the likely timescales for the next phases of the examination, and the council and I talked about this at the end of the in-person hearing sessions. And just to indicate to you, Mr. Walton, as you weren't available at that point, and I know those hearings weren't on video, but the situation is that the council is working with its consultants bio-regional in respect of policies H5 and CC2. And there is a fair bit of work to be done there, which I understand from the council was going to take around 3 to 4 weeks potentially. So I'm still waiting to receive that. Another matter which is still under discussion is that the Environment Agency has raised concerns with regard to the council's water cycle work, and there is further discussion going on there as well. So again, that is something that I am awaiting confirmation back. And again, it would requires work with the consultants, in that case, Stantec. Mr. Warringham, was there anything else you wanted to add there in terms of updates?
Not in terms of updates. No, there is one housekeeping thing, but if we when we come on to that before we start, please.
Yeah. Okay. So we might as well come on to that housekeeping thing now, Mr. Warringham, if we can.
Yes, just please, if we can, when we leave at the end of the call, if we could leave by clicking the red telephone leave button, because if you just close the window, we'll lose the recording.
So rather than end event, press leave telephone button.
Yeah, rather than close down with the X in the corner. I think that's what causes the issues.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll endeavour to do that. And I'm sure Mr. Wanton will too. Are there any other questions at this point about procedural matters? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Walton, you had expressed an interest in terms of being in attendance at matters 3 and matter 10. So if we perhaps start with matter 3 first of all. So I had set out an issue of will the council be able to demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land on adoption of the LPPU? And I'd asked a number of questions, and one of them in particular I think you picked up on was, are the assumptions and analysis regarding site suitability, availability, achievability and development capacity in the Reading Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment reasonable and realistic? In particular, are the identified capacities for sites justified? And just like to give you the opportunity to pick up on any points you'd like to raise there.
Yeah, I think just in terms of, first of all, before I start, I'd just like to thank yourself and Mr. Warringham for allowing this to happen. It was extraordinary circumstances, and therefore it's really appreciated that you've given me the chance to do this. I thought I'd put that on record. In terms of context, I think it's quite important, and Mark and Mr. Warringham knows that I'm currently progressing other schemes in Reading, so Broad Street Mile, the Minster Quarter, Royal Mail, which is 80 Caversham Road, and 2 Norman Place, all of which are allocated in the LPPU. Those schemes at the moment, I'm able to say this, are subject to significant planning delay, and given the state of the investment market, there are also significant challenges ahead in terms of their delivery, their provision of affordable housing associated with that. So when I'm making the comments with regards to Sapphire Plaza, I want that very much borne in mind, because the Sapphire Plaza and Royal Court scheme is one where it has the deliverability against it. The owners are actually the investors. They don't need the investment and so on in order to progress that, to take it forward. And the only delay in bringing this forward has actually been the local plan process, because they want the certainty that it's getting an allocation, and they want the certainty that it perhaps is in the tall building zone as well. So they know what they're working with before progressing things. So I think we made a quite substantial submission with a lot of due diligence, which covered a lot of the issues which we don't believe have been picked up by the officers in that regard. And therefore, really the purpose of this was to question some of that analysis and to see whether it was indeed, as appropriate as it should have been. taking it into detail, the assessment, obviously the assessment in document EX006, the site visit assessment, was very high level. It highlights a number of issues with regards to the sites being a relative area of disrepair and so on, but it also then identifies potential impacts in terms of trees in the locality, on the canal and the historic buildings, including the prison and the conservation area, Eldon Square conservation area, which is some distance to the south. When looking at the sort of assessment that's been taken, when you look at document EV16, and you look at the site identification and the site codes at AB084 and AB085, it's identified that the site's not subject, neither site is subject to significant environmental or technical constraint. It's also acknowledged that both of them were actually submitted together at the time, but the assessment was taken in relation of both sites separately. And I think that's where some of the issues have arisen. At stage 2A in document EV16, there's an assumed quanta of 82 dwellings for Sapphire Plaza and 17 for Royal Court. That's been devised looking at a pattern book calculation. Those other schemes haven't been subject to the pattern book calculations. They've taken a separate site-specific one. Equally, the pattern book has looked at the sites in isolation. So if you put the sites together, obviously you don't need the separation of the sites. You don't have the impacts of one site and the other, vice versa. So what that's done is it has had the effect of reducing the development potential of the site very significantly. And it's had the potential of omitting Royal Court from the development process, because it was then excluded at, I think it was at stage 2B. So then everything then just looked at Sapphire Plaza. That's important because Sapphire Plaza has had a permitted development approval previously for 85 dwellings on site, which wasn't progressed because it's not really viable to do so. Sapphire Plaza is a 1980s quite monolithic structure. It has a very, very large atrium in the middle, and therefore providing residential within that isn't possible for around half of the development because it's all north facing and single aspect, and the size of the dwellings doesn't really work simply because of the very large atrium. So you'd have to fill that in, and therefore it starts to become uneconomic. Royal Court is a development at the moment of 35 dwellings, but it's in a state of pretty poor repair, and between the two sites they provide a significant marriage value and a significant opportunity to regenerate. Now, we suggested 250, I think you'll cut back, but hopefully you can hear it. We suggested 250 to 400 dwellings in our initial submission, for the call for site submission, and then it's been further detail, as you'll have seen at the Regulation 18, Regulation 19, very, very significant due diligence, which we undertook also with pre-application discussions with board members and senior members, and also with the various heritage stakeholder groups in the area, to make sure that we were developing something that they felt could be acceptable and could come forward in a sensible manner. So that has all been developed in that manner. We can go into more detail in terms of some of the specific responses from the council, if that would help. But I thought it's maybe an opportunity to let Mr. Warringham comment on the sort of the higher points, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Mr. Walton. Mr. Warringham.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the approach in the HELA, which is EV015 is the main document, 16 the site schedules, was on this site, the Sapphire, well, on both sites, was a pattern book approach, and it was consistent with all of the sites we had where they were made of constituent elements that were different in character, to have broken that down into more than one site. So you will see a lot of the major opportunity areas are broken down in that way, and some of the other sites as well. In terms of how that's led to a level of capacity, it is true in one sense that has reduced the capacity, but not in another, if you see what I mean. So in the sense that the Royal Court site was then assessed and came to a level of 8 dwellings, which was under the 10 dwelling threshold and was then removed. That is true, that the fact it's been split has led to that site being taken out, and that the overall capacity of both sites combined being reduced by 8 essentially. But had we assessed it as a single combined site, we would still have applied the same pattern book approach, which is a density. So we'd have simply applied it to a larger area. We'd have made the same exclusions that we made at suitability stage, which were related to the relationship with the residential to the south. So there's no exclusions made to account for the relationship between the two sites, but rather to the development of the south, and also the treat corridor to the north along the Kent-Navan Canal. So we'd have come to that figure of what we ended up with at suitability stage, which I believe is 62 on Sapphire Plaza, and a net gain of 8 on Royal Court. And so potentially the capacity could have been 70. It wouldn't have. It didn't push down what could have been achieved on Sapphire Plaza by splitting the two sites. So there is an argument, I think, for a combined site with a capacity of 70 and then the flexibility range that we apply either side. But it doesn't make a substantial difference.
I think yeah, sorry. I think I'm sorry. Again, taking into consideration the schemes progressing in Reading at this moment in time, and obviously the need to make best use of land and buildings in that regard, a more sort of flexible approach should have been taken. If I take recent permission for John Lewis, which is just down the road, it's almost identical in terms of size. In many ways, it's more constrained. It has the IDR right next to it with very little separation. It doesn't have the greenery and the trees in the same sort of manner. It's right opposite the Oracle and so on, but that's the same size or very similar size. Sapphire Plaza has just been approved for 170 dwellings, despite the fact that it is actually as well within the London Street conservation area. So taking that into consideration, one of the reasons we did the due diligence to look at daylight and sunlight, to look at heritage and townscape visual impact, and we checked that with the various groups, was to try and find a massing and a scale that was appropriate to. This is a site that's, whilst it's not in the tall building zone, it is adjacent to it. It is an island site. It is surrounded on all sides by roads or the canal. So it has a significant degree of separation to it. It's, as I say, it's next to Verto, which is 18 stories in height, which is directly to the northwest. So it has that ability to provide sort of a gateway, certainly to people arriving from the east down the A4 into Reading. And some of the CGIs we provided showed that. So I think what we were saying is we did further due diligence. So we went above sort of pattern book development. We looked at what you would do for pre-application to really set out what could be delivered, what would forward with your policies in terms of density, in terms of mix, in terms of separation distances to other developments, and also in terms of making sure it met daylight and sunlight. So we know that the site and the scheme that we've got generally accords with policy. There are issues, and which is raised in terms of separation to the buildings to the south, but obviously in terms of space planning exercise, further development, further design development of that would be able to resolve those quite easily. The development we've got at the moment doesn't have overlooking to the south. The buildings, the orientation of all of the rooms is east and west rather than north and south, so that sort of overcomes that. And there's the separation of the road as well, and the greenery and so on, and ways that we can open up that site if needs be. So it's trying to think about that. I think in other terms as well, it's to say there shouldn't be a limit, shouldn't be a cap placed on development. It should be for the local plan to provide the flexibility, to provide the opportunity for and a bit more certainty for developers to take things forward, to show what is indeed possible. We believe that the submissions we made, which as I say were probably the most detailed ones you got in the local plan, were able to evidence that. The other things that are of note are here is obviously the constraint of the canal was raised. Now at the moment, the development and the retaining wall of development goes 6 meters away from the canal. So where we're suggesting it close to 8 meters is actually providing some betterment from the current position. Whilst I wasn't in this country, I did actually, I can submit this if needs be, I did get somebody to take pictures of the canal in the very inclement weather we had, and the canal wall wasn't breached. So despite all the flooding that was all over this country, there was no flooding onto the site. So it's a defended position. In terms of the treed avenue, that also, the treed avenue typically compares, pairs of trees, whereas this is one line of trees, and that line of trees actually stops to the west of the IDR, and then it continues after the Horseshoe Bridge to the east of the IDR. In front of our site, it's quite sparse, and that's because the greenery is provided by the King's Road Gardens, which are opposite. And as part and parcel of our proposals, we were seeking to link, provide a bridge connection across, because it's a very poorly used area. You can only get into it from the north adjacent to the IDR and not actually from the canal side. So we were looking to link that in and provide betterment via planting and so on there, as well as greening on our own facade. So we've had sought to sort of deal with these issues. Equally, in terms of the proposals, we've dropped the proposals from west to east. So at the east, there are only 8 stories in height. Again, that's been done in terms of massing and daylight and sunlight to identify the 3-story development, which is to the east on the IDR at about 35 meters distance. And the setting of the tall building has been done as such, so it's set back from the current building line, or westernmost building line at Sapphire Plaza. And the reason for that is a bit like what's happened at Verto previously, is to ensure that the 2 church spires that are on Watlington Street and so on, they're still preserved in terms of that view as you come down Horbury Road from the prison towards the IDR and that gyratory there. So we've done what we can do to really look at those impacts and to show that there's means and ways of offsetting them whilst delivering, optimizing development here. I think I'll leave it there for now. There's other things less than substantial harm and balancing out, but I think you would know that.
Okay, thank you. Just to confirm, you mentioned about photographs being taken in inclement weather. Mr. Warringham will be aware that I visited Reading for 2 weeks in rather inclement weather. It rained not quite every day, but most days. And I did go and look at sites, including this one. So I have seen the canal at a fairly high point in terms of water. So I'm probably okay without those photos. Thank you. But Mr. Warringham, was there anything that you wanted to say in response to all the commentary there about the pattern book density and the various issues that have been raised in terms of the canal, the trees, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of some of these issues, we recognise there is an opportunity for this site to potentially improve situation as it would be, for instance, with tree planting. Again, one of the reasons it's an allocated site. We've spoken about how we approach our site allocations, the dwelling ranges, and the link to the healer. So we've already discussed that we don't apply these ranges as a cap. This is in our view what we can be confident can be delivered within the site, and we're therefore relying on in terms of our housing trajectory, our dwelling numbers in H1, etc., etc. So we do appreciate that an awful lot of work has gone into Mr. Walton's submissions on this site. However, we're not essentially to kind of go through that and then come to a conclusion that would sorry, the light keeps going off in this room, but I'll move in a sec. Just go to a conclusion that that could all be accommodated is essentially going through a development management process, which we we are not in a position to be doing as part of the local plan process. So potentially more could be accommodated on this site. So we're not absolutely not saying that we would refuse something that went above the top of the range, or that we're saying it's not possible that more could potentially be accommodated on this site. But through our approach, through applying these general town centre densities, which have taken in a wide range of developments recently permitted, so rather than using one, like for instance the John Lewis site, which every site will have its own particular circumstances, and we've used those average, so it's 327 dwellings per hectare, which is still a pretty dense development. So that's the thinking that led to the allocation. I mean, I think in terms of the range sought, I think 400 comes out as over 900 dwellings per hectare on this site, which to my knowledge we haven't ever achieved in Reading. I think the densest I could find was Station Hill Plot E, which is about 830 or something like that, which is basically a site which has developed the entire plot of the site. It goes up to about 13 stories. So, you know, that's a very dense development, and obviously we need to go through a long kind of process of looking through all the submitted information to really get a handle on what could potentially be accommodated on this site, without saying it's impossible at this stage. We're not confident enough to rely on it as the figure that we base our trajectory on, that we base H1 on, etc., etc. So again, we have all the text in the allocation policies, which makes clear that these ranges aren't to be applied as caps, and that they are an indicative monitoring figure at that point, and that at application stage it may be possible to justify more. I'm aware that some pre-app has been undertaken on this site, but the council hasn't, as far as I'm aware, through that process come to a firm view that a certain level of development can be accommodated.
Thank you, Mr. Warringham. Was there anything more you wanted to add based on what you've just heard, Mr. Walton?
Yeah, just key things, and taking the last bit first on the pre-app, we haven't had formal pre-app in terms of development management pre-app at this stage. We've dealt with members and with heritage groups just to try and understand the lay of the land, and then the rest of the sort of consultation has actually been done by the local plan process, because the owners didn't want to press too far until they knew sort of really what the risk profile of this site was. Now, the reason that's important is, as I said, the Sapphire Plaza hasn't, when it had permitted development, hadn't been progressed. So it's essentially an undeliverable site as it sits, which is very similar to, you wouldn't knock down Sapphire Plaza in order to build 70-something units on it. It technically, financially wouldn't work in that regard, hence why we've looked for more. But in terms of density, and this is quite important, the density is high because the submission we made is probably 2/3 co-living units, so they're very much smaller. When you look at co-living, you look at the density sort of applied. I hate doing this in sort of the London plan and so on. They will look at, 2 point something equating to your standard sort of 1 bed or 2 bed flat, depending on the square footage of the unit. So if you took a standard sort of sizing for this development and you divided the square footage by, say, you get to about 250 dwellings of normal sort of mix, 1, 2, and 3 beds. Hence why we went for the 250 to 400, and that's closer to sort of a 550 dwellings per hectare, which in that sense is also very similar to the densities that were approved at John Lewis, are going forward at T Norman Place at this moment in time, and equally Broad Street Mile. So it's very similar in that sort of sense. So we have tried to provide a sort of consistent sort of approach. As you know, most things, because you have to meet so many technical standards, and also ensuring that you're meeting external amenity as well, it brings you to sort of a similar number if the site is of a similar means, because you're then trying to ensure it's viable so you can get your affordable housing in there as well. So that's been a particular target of ours.
Thank you. Mr. Warringham, anything further on co-living?
No, not particularly. No, thank you.
Okay.
I mean, other than to say, I think we're obviously this is very new to us. We'd used, I think the equivalent we had used was 4 units to 1 unit of accommodation. Although aware that other authorities will have other standards, and will probably that will probably develop over time as our understanding of the form of accommodation improves.
Thank you. Anything further on matter 3 type issues? Mr. Walton?
Yeah, I think that the only thing I would reiterate is that it's quite important that whilst I understand that development is not a cap, I do feel, in terms of development potential, taking this forward, a realistic number for units on here is relevant. I think 70 is significantly too low for the reasons that I've made, and I'd like to see a wider range in there. I think it's really for the developer to ensure that they can maximise delivery in here, which in turn helps the council in terms of its own optimising delivery. This is a good island site with a lot of potential, so hence I'd like to see that reflected in the allocation.
Thank you, Mr. Walton. Anything further on that, Mr. Warringham, before we move on to matter 10?
Not on that. No, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. So, Mr. Walton, you'd also responded on matter 10. So this was particularly what became matter 10D on Central Reading. So I'd asked whether the policies for Central Reading are justified, deliverable and consistent with national policy. There is policy CR10, which relates to tall buildings. And I'd asked whether it was justified, effective and consistent with national policy and based on robust and up-to-date evidence. And obviously we've already had some discussion at the matter 10 hearings about this, but did you want to get your point of view across?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's probably a rarity, but I'd say I'm quite generally supportive of the tall buildings policy. I think it gives a coordinated and cohesive approach to height within town centre. You just have, you don't get building here and building there. They've really thought about where they want to place the buildings. But I think against this set out in your matters, issues and questions, it's clear that other policies and local plan do provide sufficient protection and determining the suitability of tall buildings. So in terms of this site, and this is where it becomes interesting from a development management perspective, if you go into pre-application with Reading, and I'm sure the officers would corroborate this afterwards, if you're not in the tall building zone, there is a cap put on your development. It won't go past 10 stories. That is seen as a red line. That is something where, irrespective of the benefits of the proposal, affordable housing and so on, it's a very, very hard task to overcome that cap. We believe in that respect, where we are adjacent to, I forgot what they call them now, so I should, the areas of less, the tall buildings extension zone, as it would be there, is less suitable for tall buildings. That's what it's called. So we are adjacent to the potential extension to the north and adjacent to what is the tall building zone to the west with Verto. So we are very close to that development. And in terms of where we are as a gateway site, with good separation on all sides, and with the heritage and townscape visual impact of the daylight and sunlight work undertaken, again, we've proven that a tall building, we believe we've proven a tall building come forward in this area. Therefore, we don't want to be fettered by the fact that we're not within a tall buildings zone, because that is how it will work. We don't want to have to take something to appeal to discuss what potentially could be appropriate. Allocation in the tall building zone doesn't automatically equate to delivery height. So, they have the controls in place. So it's either you don't have a tall building zone, although I think that's good, or if you have a tall building zone, it's entirely appropriate to bring forward and put buildings into that tall building zone if the due diligence has been taken at this time to show that it actually could be accommodated, which we believe it does.
Thank you. Mr. Warringham. Yeah, I mean, firstly, Mr. Walton's completely correct. That is how we apply the tall buildings policy, and that's how the tall buildings policy is written to be applied. That's the route to putting forward a tall building outside the tall building zone is really as another material consideration outside the development plan that has recently gone through Planning Applications Committee on the Oracle site. So that wasn't. I appreciate this update does bring it within the areas of lesser suitability, but at the time, well, the adopted plan at the time is still it's still outside the tall building zone. So yes, we do apply it as a fairly hard break. It's 10 residential, 12. Sorry, 10 commercial, 12 residential is how we apply it as an equivalent. But that still gives very substantial scope to deliver high density development outside the tall buildings clusters. And Mr. Walton used the example of John Lewis. That is outside the tall buildings cluster. That is not a tall building, but it still delivers substantially high density on that site. So we obviously explained in the hearing why our approach is as it is to tall buildings. I don't want to go through necessarily all that again. We do feel we're basing this on evidence that was good at the time and which we've now updated and then reassessed to ensure that we're still basing this on up-to-date evidence. I will say that the eastern grouping was always envisaged in the original policy to only have a small number of tall buildings in it, 2 of which are now kind of up there, the Blade and the Verto. So it was never expected to be a dense cluster of tall buildings, and I think that's relevant when you're considering sites which might be just outside it as well. This was obviously assessed through the tall building strategy. I think in Mr. Walton's statement, he does refer to there being a different character on the areas south of Queen's Road, which we accept. But I mean, most of the cluster is still areas north of Queen's Road, and I think this site does share a lot of character with other areas as you progress westwards along the north of Queen's Road. So I do think the townscape capacity of this area has been adequately assessed through the tall buildings strategy and through the relevant updates.
Thank you. Mr. Walton?
Yeah, I think coming back to my earlier point with regards to density capacity of the site, it's not to place a hard cap on this development. If we are able to deliver, and if we're able to show that we can deliver further height, then we should be included within tall buildings extension zone. Otherwise, as we've heard, we'll be automatically capped at a certain level. Now, because the higher building is co-living, we'd be losing somewhere between 12 and 15 dwellings per story. But typically, whilst it is 12 stories in the tall buildings policy, delivery always finds it is more similar to 10 stories, because you typically have a higher floor-to-floor height at ground floor, and you have lift overruns and the like, and plant and so on. And because it takes to a datum of 36 metres, for instance, 2 Norman Place has been designed at 10 stories, not 11 or 12, because we simply can't fit it in with the other standards you have to make. So it does tend to cap it at 10 stories, which in this instance we believe would be lead to a significant reduction in development potential. Now, going back to Mr. Warringham's point on assessment and so on, the earlier assessment of the local plan and the local plan that's obviously under review at this moment in time was assessed prior to housing delivery being embodied in later NPPFs, and obviously you have the 35% uplift and so on. So that provides a higher bar for you to hit. And to hit that higher bar, you either have to go up or go out. Reading can't go out. It's the centre of a donut surrounded by the shires as such. So it's always had that issue as to how it delivers, as you well know. And so when you have a site that can deliver further and can prove that it can deliver further, it shouldn't be bettered from doing so. You have the other policies of the local plan to allow you to do that and to determine what could be right. It could be that we currently have, I think it's a 19-storey tower. It could be that that's 16 stories, 15 stories, but that still will improve the viability of the scheme, that still will deliver more than if it was 10 stories, which in turn ensures it has more affordable housing delivery. It has more benefits associated with it because the value of that site and what it can deliver back by sill and so on is obviously significantly greater. And that's why, you know, we've made the submission not just on matter 3 but matter 10, because matter 10 here is very important to ensure there's better delivery against matter 3.
Thank you. Mr. Warringham?
Yeah, so in the tall buildings strategy update, we do look at the issue of what's the impact of having a site where you could have had a tall building or instead you're developing a high density without a tall building. And whilst we appreciate sites will vary, in general terms, we don't think necessarily it is as significant a reduction as you might think. And we use in the tall buildings update note, we use the example of Thames Quarter, where they moved from 3 tall buildings to 1 tall building on site, with a reduction of, I think it was something like 30 units. Now, let's say that will vary from site to site, clearly. I think in this particular case, and Mr. Walton slightly downplayed how close this is to the conservation area, Eldon Square conservation area. That is a significant constraint. The view northwards along Watlington Street, the 2 spires of the churches, etc., that will need to be carefully considered. The site is also close at the eastern end, so if Royal Court was part of the site, then it would be fairly close to the buildings on the north side of King's Road, which also form part of the same conservation area. So there are sensitivities that are part of the reasoning as to why the tall building strategy arrived at the conclusions that it did for that area.
Thank you. Mr. Walton?
I was just trying to find the page numbers. I'll try and follow up with this afterwards. If you look at our latest submissions, the regulation 19 submission for Sapphire Plaza, we put in CGIs very specifically to show views from those places. Now, between ourselves and Queen's Road and then the following Eldon Square conservation area is a building called Q2, which ranges in height from sort of 8 to 10 stories. What that does is it provides actually a wall of developments which would block out all but the tall element of our scheme from the south. We then deliberately reduced towards the east. So if you look at the view that we've submitted in the CGIs, it's taken from the east down the A4 back towards the site. It shows that the site forms a pretty continuous height in terms of that has already been submitted and approved and indeed delivered on site by Q2. So from the east, there's no greater impact, and Q2 actually sits in the foreground. And from the south, where Eldon Square is, obviously Q2 provides this continuous wall of development. There's only limited views. As you go down Watlington Street back towards the site, you get more limited views, obviously, the closer you get towards the building. But as you do that, you take that in the context of Verto, which is 18 stories. So we've deliberately tried to place our development and our height accordingly, taking into consideration those matters. And the 2 church spires that Mr. Warringham relates to were very high on our agenda, because that's one of the key things that the heritage groups asked us to look at. And as I say, we spent a significant amount of time with Montague Evans ensuring that the due diligence on that was very, very rigidly and robustly reviewed. I think we believe we've done the right thing in that context.
Thank you. Mr. Warringham, was there anything further?
I was also struggling to get the page and document reference on this, but I did look at those images, and I think looking at them, it appears it makes a difference where on Watlington Street you're looking from, essentially. The degree to which the spire would have a tall building on this site as the backdrop. So I think from recollection, I think if you're further south along Watlington Street back towards the hospital, it would be more prominent as part of the view, and then it would gradually, as you get to the northern end of Watlington Street, it would be less visible behind the Q2 buildings. Obviously, then you're getting into matters which are really of considerable detail. But I think we would stand by our evidence as this area broadly not having the townscape capacity for taller buildings and sitting outside the zones, therefore.
Okay, I think I understand where both of you are coming from on this, but Mr. Walton, was there anything else you wanted to add in terms of CR10 and tall buildings?
It was just to draw your attention to the page numbers in the Reg 19 document. 67 to 69 are the CGIs, which show that relationship we've just been discussing. But there are wider heritage and townscape views, which are on pages 74 to 78, which show where the viewpoint's taken from, and obviously the block form view as well. So that should help with your assessment.
Thank you. Okay. Anything further, or shall we move on to actually talking about CR 14Z Sapphire Plaza? No. Okay. So what I did in the matter 10D hearing was go through site by site. Nobody else raised any particular points on CR14Z that I recall. The Environment Agency were there at that point. Mr. Warringham can correct me if I'm wrong. But so as it stands, and I understand that the council hasn't sought to modify this through any further modifications that it's put forward in its hearing statement. The allocation at the moment is for Sapphire Plaza only, excluding Royal Court. It's for residential development, and it sets out a series of bullet point requirements in terms of tree planting and landscaping, separation, air quality, noise, contamination, and impacts on water infrastructure. And then it sets out the site size, which obviously excludes Royal Court, and it sets out a dwelling range, which we've already had some discussion of dwelling range, but that again would exclude Royal Court. So I understand the council's rationale, Mr. Warringham, in terms of separating out different types of uses when you're looking at assessing sites. But what's the council's view in terms of excluding? Should the allocation include Royal Court?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the judgment we came to when we looked at it separately is 8 dwellings, apart from being below the 10, is it worth redeveloping an existing occupied residential block? I think what I'd say is I'd be fairly comfortable if the allocation did include Royal Court and was extended to include Royal Court, because as Mr. Walton's submission points out, that the conclusion of the healer when it looked at it was that it would be suitable for development. Obviously not the amount of development that was sought. So I mean, I wouldn't have a problem if there was a main modification that brought Royal Court into the wider allocation. I don't think the council would propose that it's anything other than the level of development from the healer, which was kind of 8 dwellings, and then what the range would be, I'm not entirely sure, but we would need to work that out. But that, I mean, I think that's something we'd be fairly amenable to. Okay, so having taken that response into account, and I will come back to you, Mr. Walton, to give you the opportunity to respond, but just thinking about it, as it stands, would any of the requirements of this allocation change if Royal Court were to be included? Obviously, apart from the site size and the number of dwellings,
but would there be any additional requirements?
I think they would more likely be slight tweaks to the one we've got. So I expect, and I would need to go and double check, that Kings Road is a treed corridor, so that might need to be referenced as well. I don't know. It might be something we needed to think about whether there's something we need to have in terms of existing residents and being, because I think Mr. Walton's suggestion in the submission was that they'd be decanted into another part of the site. Something in there to cover that. Other than that, I can't think of anything that would need to be substantively different.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Walton.
Yeah, just I'm glad you mentioned the existing residents, Mr. Warringham, because that is something that we're aware of. Just so you know, the owners own the majority of the units in that development, and so there's actually quite a small number. Most people in there are actually leaseholders or renting from there. But obviously, as part of any regeneration, you've got to look at the ways and means that you protect those people, whether you offer them a fair price for the development or whether they form part and parcel of the regeneration. So you'd have that discussion as part of the wider pre-app and development process. In terms of the numbers, I would just again reiterate, obviously, in terms of the numbers that you looked at, to come up with 8 for Royal Court, there's 35 on site already. So that should be at least borne in mind, but you wouldn't knock down 35 in order to replace it with 35. And obviously the development that we've put forward there is a little bit more efficient and more effective, and obviously provides significant gentrification of that site in the wider area. So we would ask again the inspector to look at the marriage value of that site, what she thinks may be feasible in terms of the development of Royal Court. Obviously, the intervening area that hasn't been taken into consideration in those numbers, because obviously everything fit together rather than being separated, and obviously what could be relevant for Sapphire Plaza, ideally as a tall building. I'll just come back to what I've said before. It's a good opportunity to provide good housing on here. The controls sit with Reading anyway, but obviously, as we've put forward, that provide a good mix of co-living and built rent units, provide significant gentrification of the area and public realm improvements. So it's allowing a site that's subject to a lot of antisocial behaviour issues and really is in need of gentrification. That can only really be brought forward as part of a comprehensive redevelopment, hence why we would like those numbers to be pushed up to recognise what we feel is a pretty robust submission that we've made.
Thank you. Mr. Warringham.
No, I mean, I think we've talked around it. Just to clarify, if it wasn't clear that eight dwellings would be the net gain, that's what we're talking. So 43 from Royal Court, which would clearly need to be clarified in any modified policy.
Indeed. Would any
put that down to jet lag? Sorry.
Would any other modifications be required for soundness?
So from our point of view, that would change the housing trajectory. There would need to be changes made to wherever the allocation is referred to. So it would be in the implementation schedule. I think we'd need to take a view whether it impacted the figure in policy H1. Obviously, if it was only a change of 8, it's minimal, isn't it? It may not be worth doing. But
you may also be doing that job anyway, Mr. Warringham, just thinking about some of the sites that we've discussed throughout the process. Particularly, Mr. Walton may not be aware, but the Environment Agency raised concerns about the inclusion of a number of sites. So I've said that I will take those sites away and think about them. But if I were to say that those sites needed to be removed, there would be similar issues.
There would be, obviously, in addition, we've had sites that have come into the trajectory through prior approvals that impact that number. It would certainly affect the table. I think it's table or bullet points in the supporting text to H1, which just says how many dwellings there'd be on allocated sites.
Okay.
And obviously consequential changes to the proposals map.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. And in your view, Mr. Walton, were there any other modifications required for soundness, obviously having taken into account what you've been saying about the inclusion of royal court and also about the pattern book densities?
No, I think I've made the points I want to make in that regard.
Okay. Anything further?
I think I'd reiterate what I said at the start in terms of delivery of housing in Reading. It is slowing down. I don't know what's been submitted elsewhere, but as I said, I'm dealing with 4 of the larger schemes at the moment, all of which are substantially delayed. It's a matter of officer resource at Reading and going slow through planning at one end, but also the investment market at the other end. So that's quite difficult. So sites that come forward that are less constrained in that regard and can deliver should be looked at positively. I think I'd make the point Reading shouldn't be relying on PD. It's put in an Article 4 direction to stop that previously, and therefore good quality planning starts with local plan process and development management and taking forward successful regeneration schemes rather than actually bumping the numbers up with PD, because that has its own inherent issues. So I think I'd just leave it with that.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Warringham?
No, I agree. We don't wish to rely on PD, but it is in the figures because they are approvals that are likely to take place.
Okay, thank you. So, as I said at the beginning, the council will produce a list of actions which will go on the website from stage 2. With regard to this site, given that the extent of discussion we've had on this site, I think it's sensible if I take this one away and reflect on it, and it will form part of the letter that I will send to the council in due course in respect of a number of issues that I was taking away and thinking about. So once that letter's published, it will be available on the council's website for all to see, Mr. Walton, so please do keep an eye on the examination website. But thank you very much, both of you, for your participation this morning. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good day. So the hearing is now closed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Remember to click on the red leave.
And if you make sure you click on the red leave button, that would be very helpful to Mr. Warringham and I. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Okay,
Thank you
have a
very
good
much.
day, everyone. Cheers.